Hello, Comic-Con 2016. Welcome to the What's New Del Rey Books panel. My name is Mike Braff. I'm an editor with Del Rey, and I'd like to introduce you to my esteemed panelists. Starting on the far left, though his path to publication was uncommon at best, our next author has found critical and commercial success with his debut science fiction novel, Sleeping Giants. Please welcome all the way from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, Sylvain Neuvel. To Sylvain's right, after receiving his MFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia, our next panelist attended the Clarion West Conference, where he studied under the tutelage of such luminaries as George R.R. Martin and Kelly Link. Please welcome all the way from Kolkata, India, Indra, author of The Devourers. Our next author made his name not only writing amazing horror and science fiction novels, but from groundbreaking podcasting. His YA novel, Alive, recently topped the New York Times bestseller list. Please welcome hometown favorite Scott Sigler. When not writing his New York Times best-selling Red Rising series, our next author can be found hiking in the Pacific Northwest, traversing Scotland by motorcycle, and Instagramming pictures of other people's dogs. Please welcome Pierce Brown. Growing up in the shadow of Hadrian's Wall in Yorkshire, England, our next author works by day at the NASA Goddard Flight Center. He combined his two loves, Roman history and flight, in the thrilling Clash of Eagles trilogy. Please welcome Alan Smale. Raised right here in San Diego, our next author got his start designing video games, but transitioned to sci-fi authordom with the New York Times best-selling novel, The Darwin Elevator. Please welcome back to town, Jason M. Hough. So this is an easy softball question, guys, and we're going to start with Jason and work our way down that way. Okay. What was your most recent publication, and what are you working on next?
My most recent publication is actually this one, Zero World. The paperback just came out in May. And what I'm working on next is a two-book duology that serves as a sequel to the Darwin Elevator trilogy. So we don't have any titles or covers to reveal yet, but look for those next summer. Next summer.
See.
Okay, I'm Alan Smale. I'm the author of the Clash of Eagles trilogy. Clash of Eagles itself came out in March of 15, I think. Yes, and so the paperback for that has been out for a while, and some of you may have picked it up today at the Del Rey booth. The sequel, Eagle in Exile, came out earlier this year, and I can now reveal that the third volume, Eagle and Empire, will be out in May of 2017, and this is the very first time that the cover has been seen in public. There it is.
Had to see it.
Very, very happy with it. Thank you.
All right, so my most recent novel, This Sexy Little Beast, came out in, I know, it's our secret word, we call it. Actually, I just call it that. Mike didn't know that. Came out in February, and I'm working on the sequel to the Red Rising trilogy, and it's called Iron Gold, and will be out sometime next year. I'm right in the middle of writing it right now, and I can't wait to share it with y'all.
My current book out is Alight. That is the sequel to Alive. This is book 2 in the Generations Trilogy. Book 3, the Generations Trilogy alone, will be out March 7th, and there will not be a fourth book, which when you finish book 3, you will understand why there could never be a fourth book ever. There's a lot of significant damage going on. And then since that is actually done, I am down to line edits, I am working on a sci-fi military horror concept called The Crypt. That's what I'm working on right now.
Ooh.
My most recent book, and my only book so far, is The Devourers. I'm working on a bunch of short stories next, but I definitely plan on writing a second novel, I'm hoping it's going to be sci-fi-ish, but cross-genre. Like this book, this is also a variety of genres kind of mashed into one thing. So yeah.
My most recent and only book is Sleeping Giants. It came out in April of this year, and I am working on the rest of the Themis Files series. The next volume is called Waking Gods, and it will be available next April.
So this is just a general question anyone can answer. When was the moment, if you can identify, that you knew you were going to try writing or you were going to be a writer?
I figured it out in the 3rd grade. We had this project to make our own little books, blank paper books, and then we were supposed to write in it, and most of the kids wrote about how they love mom or dad or their cats or dogs, and I wrote a story called Tentacles, Tentacles, and More Tentacles, in which a hapless ocean liner stumbles upon a giant sea monster, gets cracked in half, and everyone dies. It was 12 pages of 3rd grade scribbling, but I thought it was fairly riveting. I liked it a lot, and I knew what I wanted to do from a very early age.
You've come a long way. No 4th book because of tentacles?
That's right.
Yeah.
And more tentacles.
Mine was, I guess I don't really know the exact moment, but I think that an important moment for me was I was 18 and I was on the football team. We were watching films early in the morning. I think it was like 7 in the morning, and I'd been reading, was it Dance with Dragons? No, at this time it was Storm of Swords. I'd been reading it up really late. And so I got to bed at probably 4 o'clock because, next chapter, but nothing had happened, so I was racing towards death. And then nothing still happened, so I just fell asleep with the book, like, right here. This is like my pose in high school, just like half draped off the bed with a Storm of Swords on my chest. And so I basically am in the front row, and I fall asleep in the middle of films. And I wake up to my coach, who's a diminutive man, maybe 5'1", with wore a fedora, and he's screaming in my face, "Pierce!" So I wake up, and I was like, just like startled, and he says, "Why were you sleeping?" I said, "I was up late reading, coach." And he says, "Reading books?" And he says, "What's more important to you, books or football?" And I say, "Football? No, books, coach." And he says, "No!" And I knew at that moment that books was gonna be my future, not football. That and the size thing, but
I have a similar story to Scott, actually. In school, in creative writing classes, we would get various essay subjects, and I would always inevitably end up writing something that was absolutely not relevant to the topic we got. And I remember writing this little remake of Jurassic Park in my creative writing class, and it was set in China, and a bunch of scientists go and discover raptors in a forest valley. And they all die, like in your story. And I remember the teacher telling me that gout was not a word that could be used to describe blood emerging from a person. And I was like, no, I read it in Jurassic Park and Stephen King, so nope, incorrect. But I think that was around the time that I realized that I wanted to tell stories.
You said everybody died?
Oh yeah, everybody
I want
died.
to read this.
It's long lost.
I wrote little comic books when I was, 5, 6, 7, whatever, so I could buy action figures. I'd sell them to the neighbors. I lived in a cute suburban neighborhood with nice, happy people, so I couldn't kill everyone. But I got to buy C-3PO and R2-D2, and I don't know, I guess I stuck with it. Somehow, my writing is always sort of related to buying toys or making them.
I started early too. I was about 7 years old, and the reason I know this is because my parents kept the evidence. It's a terrible handwritten thing that I did. My handwriting wasn't very good either, so it's hard to disentangle. But it's actually a complete rip-off of Tarzan called The Mountain Children. And so there are these 3 kids like running around in the mountains and almost getting killed by things and protecting people and saving them from lions and tigers and elephants and bears and all kinds of other creatures that don't actually live in the same habitat. So that was The Mountain Children. And in my book, nobody died because the kids saved them all.
I think
Scott
I started.
has no interest in reading that one, does he?
I hope you enjoy it, but I'm out.
Not enough gouting blood.
I decided to start writing the day that I heard Firefly got canceled, actually. I know. Well, that was my that was my reaction.
right there.
It wasn't like I was thinking good. No, it was.
One good thing came out of it.
I was thinking there needed to be more stuff like that in the world, and if they were going to cancel that show, then I would take it into my own hands and write something fun and accessible as science fiction.
Be more like Jason.
So I've worked with enough of you to know that writing can sometimes be lonely business. What's the process like for you? Do you ever reach difficult moments?
Yes. I think that's a universal yes. Writing
Yeah.
is extremely, extremely annoyingly difficult at times. For me, I think the hardest part is just starting a story. And then once I get the ball rolling, it gets slightly easier. Ideally, it's interesting that you mentioned that it's lonely. I never feel lonely at all when I'm writing. I mean, I tend to write in public spaces, and I like being surrounded just by this swarm of humanity and writing while that's going on around me. But even when I'm writing alone, I don't find it lonely because I'm kind of communicating with these people in another dimension, essentially, in my brain.
I also don't think it's lonely. You've got a lot of company in your head, and a lot of voices in your head. So it's not lonely, but the most difficult times are when you have invested a significant portion of your life creating a part of the story that then you realize has to go, and possibly you shouldn't have created in the first place, or you're like, there's just no room for it anymore. That is the worst part of it to me, kind of being ADD, and wow, I focused for 3 weeks to write this one part, and then in the overall context, it's got to go. It doesn't work for the story anymore. That's a little heart-wrenching about the time you've lost, and that's the most difficult part for me.
I wouldn't say that it's lonely for me, but I do know that there's a lot more dissonance between the way I feel like I'm living my life and then seeing social situations happening. So I'll feel like a much more like I got like fly on the wall syndrome. And so the more I'm into a story, the more I'm trying to crack a story, and I spend such a long time talking with myself and all these, menagerie of characters you have in your head. The stranger it is sometimes to be at a party or be with friends or to be standing in line where everyone's playing Pokemon Go and you have trouble connecting. And I think a lot of times it's because you spend so much time making the connections with yourself and with logic and with story and piecing everything together. It's like Tetris in your head with a story a lot of times. And so when you're doing that all day, sometimes it's very difficult to then adjust and then remember words and social interactions, and that you're supposed to look people in the eye when you're toasting them. Sometimes I'll just be like, go away, I want to drink. And for me, it's more isolating in terms of just thinking about how my brain works than it is, emotionally lonely.
I don't feel emotionally lonely when I'm writing either. In fact, I couldn't write surrounded by people. I know there are people that write in coffee houses and write in the corridors of the science fiction cons and things like that. I could never do that. I have to be by myself, but I'm very happy being by myself. So I don't find that part difficult at all. I think the most difficult part of writing is just beginning sometimes. I think once I really start, I can just roll for hours and hours, but sometimes the first initial push is a little difficult.
I guess I'm sort of on this roller coaster that cycles between Alan and Indra in terms of, if I'm feeling really lonely as a writer, I will go to coffee shops and public places and write, so there's a lot of noise and activity around me. And then that'll start to wear on me, and I'll feel it's too crowded or whatever after a few days of that, and then I'll head back to writing at my house. I've sort of built my ideal office, and it's very quiet, and I can get that solitude back. So I guess sometimes I need one or the other, I suppose.
Yeah, but when you first start out writing, you don't really get to choose where you're writing. And I think you're writing at any point you can. I mean, I was working a 9-to-5 job, and I'd be writing in the, what would it be, during my lunch breaks in my car with my coffee, with just the windows rolled down. You write for 35 minutes and then you sprint. And that's not lonely because you're just hoping you can get any words down. Because, of course, you have all these great ideas, and you sit in front of the computer screen, and you set up your coffee, and you're like, shit.
I would actually write on the job. So somebody was paying me to do a job, and I was like looking around, call up the invite. I have in the old days when you actually had to send out paper manuscripts. I can't even imagine how much I cost the companies I worked for in Xerox charges. It was obscene, but it got the job done.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I wrote this book with a full-time job and a 6-year-old kid. And so the tough part for me was the pressure to be great and productive for that little bit of time I had after he went to bed. In terms of loneliness, though, no, I write on my couch. Barbara's usually next to me reading. So I don't know. I love the process, but the tough part to me was the pressure to be good for that short amount of time that I had to, because I would also write a little bit at work, but the part where I could actually just really concentrate on it, you feel like a huge pressure to be great and good and productive for that however many hours you put in.
The worst is sneaking back from the copy room with your manuscript, and people are like, what do you have there? I'm like, not a novel.
Just 500 pages of memos.
One time I forgot it in there. Someone's like, what the hell is this? A Requiem for Light. Pierce? Like, no, that's not mine. I don't know what that is.
Why does it say by Pierce Brown on it?
Elaborate practical joke Scott Sigler plays on me.
So how do you settle on an idea and say, this is the one that I'm going to write, this is the one that I'm going to follow through to fruition? What's your process?
Oh, wow.
I'm guessing that one, Red Rising, hit you and you were like, this is the jam.
I think that Mike and I have this standard now, and it's called like the tingle factor. And so if we're pitching an idea,
Nobody calls it that.
I call it this. I make up all these terms. I don't really let Mike know about them until we're in public. So basically, if you can make yourself get chills from an idea, you're incredibly vain, and but also it helps you know that you have the emotional resonance with the story to have the guts and then the grit to finish the story. Because if I don't have that excitement, that love of a story initially, then it's very difficult when you're about 2/3 of the way through to power through. And the middle slog of the book can sometimes take a long time, and you can always wonder, where the ending is. And if you don't have the initial excitement, still within your blood somewhere, then it's very difficult to do. Red Rising, I was very fortunate enough I wrote it basically in a month and a half, 2 months above my parents' garage, and I didn't have time to start questioning it. I just started ripping through it. The harder things is now, because now, I think Scott will talk about this, is that your time is money now, and you have to be very intelligent with how you use your time. You can't just write for fun because you have deadlines, you have things you're trying to juggle and other stories you want to tell. So now it almost has to meet a certain set of criteria, which is you have to be able to visualize the story for me in totality. If I'm writing towards a mysterious end, then I can't write the story. I have to know pretty much the last scene.
Yeah, now once you've been in it for a little while and you start something new, especially if you're considering I'm going to write a trilogy or I'm going to write a series that's 5 or even 6 books, that's 10 years of your life. That can be when it all plays out, it's this massive investment of your time. So now, being a little bit more seasoned, it's stepping back and saying, okay, what's the overall? I'm doing this right now with Trish, my editor. What's the overall pitch for this? If somebody from Hollywood wants to ask how do I say that in one sentence? What can I see this being? In addition, a series of discrete books that people will love and be happy to spend their money on. Can it be adapted for TV? Can it be adapted for movies? A lot of other things. I'm very jealous of his book. I wish I'd thought of that because that's awesome. Yes, it's fantastic. But to what Pierce said, as far as vanity goes, every artist, every author you meet is vain, and if they tell you otherwise, they are either lying or don't know themselves. Because no one enters a beauty pageant thinking they're hideous. No one does this. This is a beauty pageant of the mind right here, and everybody who sits down to write a book.
Go on.
Everyone who sits down to write a book probably goes, I've read some crappy books. I know I can do a lot better than that. And that's also one of the motivations. So we're all a little bit vain.
Yeah.
Except for Jason, of course.
Not me.
For me, I don't really have a methodology as such. I tend to have vivid dreams very often, and I settle on an image from a dream, usually. This has happened to me many times. What was that?
I said you must have very scary dreams.
They are
We've read your
terrifying.
book.
I actually also have this thing called hypnagogic hallucinations. So at the edge of sleep and waking, I often see extremely vivid hallucinations of creatures, usually like demons or ghosts, and essentially, if
Your book's making a lot more sense all of a sudden.
If you haven't read Indra's book, there's like Jacob Black werewolf, and then there's Indra's werewolf.
Yeah.
And it's like that's the spectrum.
So Often it comes from dreams, but in the case of this book, actually, it was a little incident that incited my writing a story about it. I was at a music festival in Calcutta, which is described in the first chapter of the book, and it was this festival of these rural bards, and they have a very primal music, and I was pretty intoxicated. I was there, listening to music, and this little kitten came up to me, and the festival takes place in a field at night, and it's crowded. There's people smoking hash, people drinking, and the bards are in this tent. And so I was watching from outside, and this kitten came up to me, and there's these stray dogs all around the field trying to get to this kitten. And the kitten was terrified, like trembling in my hands. And the dogs were continuously hunting it. They were never coming too close because there was many humans around, but it felt like being hunted because I was kind of the protector of this kitten, and so it made me imagine what it would feel like to be back hundreds of years ago when you didn't really have an idea of what was out there in the wilderness and the darkness. And you have this rich tradition of folklore and mythology with you that you actually believed in. And then I just end up thinking of werewolves hunting me in that area, and I asked myself, why werewolves? Why this European idea? And what are these werewolves doing in India? Which is how the book came about. So. The kitten, I hope, lived. I don't know.
He said, "Good luck to you, kitten," and threw it.
For future reference, when you tell that story, the kitten lived and is now a lap cat somewhere.
It's alive and well. The last time I saw it, it was alive. I took it away from the field.
Hold on, you are literally losing sales right now. So let's dial that back. Kitten's doing great.
Fantastic. It lives in my house.
What you need to do is take a selfie with that kitten.
Oh yeah. I'll do that once I get back to Calcutta. Yeah. I'll let you guys know.
I asked my son when he was much younger if he wanted me to build him a toy robot, and instead of just saying yes, like a normal kid should, he started asking a bunch of questions, like what does it do, where is it from, can it fly, does it have lasers, missiles? I'm like, whoa, this is, I didn't know, I didn't have the backstory for it. So I started thinking about what it would be like to find giant artifacts from different civilization in the real world, and I started writing something that by then had nothing to do with my son, but it started as a dad building a toys for his kids. So yeah, my decision-making process when it comes to what I'm writing about is very mature and adult. And and this is my first book, so I'm still working on that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No evidence, no proof.
I can guarantee that'll be the last time he tells that story this way. Come see him next year.
No, next time I'll just bring a
Bring the
cat.
kitten. That's right. My son is doing well and playing with the toy.
I'm not sure I have a process because the spark is different each time. I wrote a lot of short stories before I started writing the Clash of Eagles series, and in those cases it might be a character that grabbed me or a particular point in history, or like I wrote a story about coal mines in Yorkshire in 1937, which was published in Realms of Fantasy, the late lamented magazine Realms of Fantasy. And that one had this kind of strange genesis of wondering what it would be like to be like underground and dark and trying to think how telepathy would work under those circumstances. That's a long story. Anyway, but for the Clash of Eagles series, it was Cahokia, the place that grabbed me. That was the spark that made me know that I had to write about it. And Cahokia is a city on the Mississippi, was a city on the Mississippi. It had 20,000 people living in it. It's a Native American city, part of the Mississippian culture. And as soon as I read about it, it was actually in Charles Mann's 1491. The idea of the place just gripped me, and I knew that I had to write a story set there. And I wrote the original story. The original story was a novella. And I would have kept writing that and turning it into a book, even if nobody had wanted to read it, because it's got to be important to you, I think, and I think Scott said this early on, that it has to be something that you're really going to enjoy writing because you're going to be with it for a long time. Yeah. And I just loved writing those books, and I was actually really sad when I got to the end of writing the third book. It wasn't like I was powering through and really wanting to be done with the thing. I really enjoyed living in that world and being in that world, and so that was a lot of fun for me. And now I get to do it again because I have the edits from Mike that we were talking about earlier today, so I get to rewrite a few little bits of it.
Nice. What seems to be working for me is I keep a giant list of ideas that none of them are necessarily that great on their own, but for some reason they just interest me. So I just jot them all down, and then what inevitably happens is there of course will be some that sort of call to me a little bit more than others, but generally what inevitably happens is just one day I'll just realize that there's an interesting way to combine a couple of them. That I hadn't thought of, or thought they were totally separate ideas, and then suddenly I realized there's 2 or 3 that work really well together, and that's sort of when I have that moment of, okay, this might be an actual story. In the case of Zero World, I actually had like 5 or 6 that I was pretty excited about, so I basically just presented them to Mike as a menu, and Zero World was the one he picked. So
It looked delicious.
It did look delicious. I'm glad you picked it.
Me too.
I'm
It's
happy
good
with
book.
how it turned out.
What I find a lot of times is when you have an idea, sometimes it's just that, an idea, and it's not actually a story.
Yeah.
And you have a setting, you might have a character, but the problem is you don't have tension. And so sometimes it's taking a couple ideas and putting them together where you create the tension. And cause I've started a lot of stories where I'm just like, okay, so why do I care about this? And so often you can write aimlessly without knowing, unless you create that, the obstacle in front of, it can't just be just an obstacle in front of the hero, but some sort of internal contradiction with the story, which really helps open up stories for me.
So for many years, science fiction fantasy was sort of ghettoized and thought of as a secondary genre, a lesser genre among most people in America, or many people in America. But you all use science fiction fantasy to explore really rich, important themes. So what themes do you explore, and why is sci-fi fantasy the preferred vehicle for exploring those?
Silence.
A ponderates.
I explore the theme of why Pierce is always picking on me. That's the.
Yeah.
I don't know that the themes that I explore would be all that different if I was writing thrillers or some other thing. I think a lot of these themes are universal, but when you are writing something in the realm of science fiction or fantasy, any kind of genre fiction, you can dispel an enormous amount of the day-to-day things that would have to be explained in a modern-day story. And you can distill it. Like, for example, in Red Rising, we're able to look at class stratification, and you don't have to talk about, there's not a lot of setup. Once you get to it, you're like, okay, this is crystallized. Here's this thing that I want to discuss and look at the way that it impacts the world. So I think a lot of, with science fiction, or in my Generations trilogy, in this one, I'm able to look at, race relations and gender relations from a completely different perspective by sort of removing those as a significant factor and watching people find ways to hate each other when those things don't matter anymore. You can't do that in a modern day setting because there's so much baggage attached with gender and class and race, et cetera, and those things have to be addressed in a modern day setting. Far future setting, far past setting, any kind of fantasy setting, you can sort of pick and choose the points you want to make, and then comes down to the basics of telling a good story with drama and tension, et cetera. But that's kind of that's why I think science fiction works.
Yeah, I look at stories like The Little Prince when I'm thinking about answering this question. Little Prince is one of my favorite books growing up, and I loved it because of how metaphorical it is. And the entire thing is an allegory. And these books, in a lot of ways, are allegories or metaphors for things that we want to explore, talk about, things that are interesting in our lives. Yet we dress them up in a way that is fantastical because it's age-old. It's the tradition of humanity to create stories. And I think by creating stories, it helps us understand our world. To make sense of the world around us, we make things up. And in order to do that, for me, like in order to talk about what I want to talk about, I have to divorce people from their internal governor, their internal restrictions, or their internal biases against something I might say. So I might say something politically that you would disagree with. However, if I then put it in a story and say, and address a topic, for instance, immigration, then all of a sudden you're looking at it from a perspective of human beings in this world with different sets of circumstances, and you can look at it with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And I think that's the ability of sci-fi and fantasy, to give us fresh eyes and give us the ability to look at things in ways we haven't, with new texture and in a different angle than we've ever seen them before.
I'll say one more thing. You can't get things wrong. Is the other thing. When you're making up your own world and creating this context in which there's a story you want to tell and a theme you want to explore, again, if it's a modern day thing, and I talk about American-Chinese relations, that's an enormous amount of work to make sure I have all that right and to address all of those things so then I can tell the story. And I guarantee you there'll be half the people reading who think I've got it completely wrong. When you are making up the two nation states and how they interact, you're always right. So you get that out of the way and tell the story.
Until you write a trilogy, and then people are correcting you. Actually, her eyes are brown.
In book one, you
Yeah,
said.
exactly.
I think I agree with Pierce in that science fiction and fantasy gives us a way to tell stories without any kind of limitation. So, and it's what we've done from the beginning since we first started telling stories. Our religions, our mythologies are all science fiction and fantasy, essentially.
Your story very much feels like one of those stories.
That was very much what I intended. Yeah, like I love mythology, and I think it's the oldest form of storytelling, and it has always been fantasy. It has always been science fiction, and I think that's because of our weird brains. Like we contextualize the world through symbols and language, and these are all made up things. Everything we do is speculative. Even this room is someone had to invent it. And it's not something that occurs naturally in the world. And so I think we're inherently speculative storytellers. Like we've created this entire gigantic form of installation art all over the world. And it's both toxic and incredible. So now I'm rambling now, but basically I think science fiction, fantasy, you can use it to tell stories about anything because there's literally nothing you cannot write about in genre. You can imagine anything that the human brain is capable of imagining. So I don't know if thematically I would deal with different things if I only wrote lit fic, for example, because I think I would deal with similar things. But in the case of the Devourers, for example, it very much gets into surviving sexual assault, and that's it's a really heavy topic, and it remains so even in this fantasy context. And I think even when using speculative mythologies, you obviously need to take a lot of care not to hurt the people who are actually affected by what you're writing about, or the populations that you're writing about. So I think it doesn't differ hugely from writing literary fiction, I think, but it does give you more space to do so, to more space to explore in a way that mythology has for ages. Like all our religious texts, for example, deal with all kinds of extremely complex things and get it wrong very often, but that's what we do as human beings. So.
Okay, I'm working in a slightly different area because I'm working in the alternate history, historical fantasy mode. So what I'm doing is going back, in this case, I'm in a past where the Roman Empire survives until the 13th century and now is moving into North America. And a lot of the stuff that I was writing before I wrote these books was also alternate history and other takes on history. And so when you're doing that, you kind of have a responsibility to the real history and to the alternate history that you're telling. Because when you're telling alternate history, you're kind of holding up a mirror to the real world, and you're making people think about things in a different way. And hopefully Clash of Eagles makes people think about like how the Western invasion of North America happened and see how it could have happened in different ways. I think good alternate history or good historical fiction can make you think more about your own world than the real world in a way that perhaps you wouldn't do otherwise. So in a way, it's a little more constrained because I can't write stories about anything. When you're working in the historical arena, you have to have a certain believability in that way. So it's a little more bounded in some ways, and you're dealing with I'm dealing with Romans and Native American cultures, a wide variety of different Native American cultures, and so I have to do justice to those and remain remain within bounds in some ways when I'm writing, but hopefully make people think about these things in a way that they haven't before.
So I'll make a confession that things like theme and symbolism and that sort of thing are basically the last thing on my mind when I'm writing a book. It's not usually until I finish the first draft that I realize, though, that these things come out subconsciously. And then once you sort of recognize what they are, at least for me, as I revise, I can start to explore those things more and really make those thoughts full and come out the way I want them to. But when I'm writing a first draft, it's not really where my head's at.
And that's true, actually, because I got to the end of the second book in the trilogy before I realized that what I was really writing about was outsiders. Outsiders from a culture, outsiders within a particular culture. All the way through the book, there are characters who are not, they're not really embedded in the culture. They came from somewhere else, or they behave differently from other people, or they have different beliefs from other people, or in the case of the lead character, they really do come from across the ocean and everything around them is completely alien. But it really is a book about outsiders, and I didn't really realize that until I got to the end of the second book.
I was going to say the same thing. I mean, I just wrote the book. In hindsight, I think it's really a book about human nature and how you can't escape it, no matter what's at stake. But I would have probably approached the same themes no matter what genre I was writing. I mean, I will stop writing science fiction the day we find giant alien robots.
Well, then everyone will think you're just the expert.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, as readers, as consumers of fantasy, consumers of fiction, what kind of stories touch you the most? What kind of stories do you seek out?
Oh,
The Devourers.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say things I was not expecting. That's what
Absolutely.
I like about. That's what I like about Red Rising, and that's what I love about this book. That you have to read this book. It's not what you think it is. That's
Yeah.
the
Mine
greatest thing I can say
mine
about
is
it.
raw jealousy most of the time. When I read the back of Red Rising, I was like, damn it, why didn't I think of that? And now the same thing with Alan's books and the Temeraire series. I was like, are you kidding me? That is so awesome. Napoleonic Wars with Air Force of Dragons. I'm like, great, okay, there goes 8 books in a row. So every time I read something where I'm very angry, I didn't think about it first because it's so awesome. That's the things that get me.
I honestly can't answer that question because I love all kinds of stories, and at one point I'll be watching an ostensibly crappy horror movie and loving it, and at another point I'll be watching a Fellini movie and loving it, and it doesn't. I really don't have any one particular kind of story that I prefer over another as long as it moves me, and I will seek out anything that seems interesting to me.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Netflix is incapable of predicting what movies I'm going to like because I watch so many different movies, and some of it is for the actors, and some of it is for the setting, and some of it is for reviews and all of that kind of thing. So, and I try deliberately, actually, to stay away from genre stuff sometimes. I like to know what's going on and make sure that I'm in the zeitgeist and that I know what everybody else is doing so that I don't inadvertently copy it. But I also want to make sure that I'm watching other kinds of movies and reading other kinds of books and making sure I kind of spread myself around and find out what's going on in a lot of other fields. And so it's often something kind of intangible. It's kind of like the question about, how do you know what you're going to write? And sometimes you don't. It's just a visceral thing. It's like, oh, that is really cool. That's really interesting. I want to know more about that. And it may be something that I've never thought about before. Generally is, actually, because those are the most interesting things.
I'd say my favorite is when I stumble on a book. Like a friend leaves a book behind, and I'm just like, well, let's crack this open. And then you stumble onto someone's world. And that's what happened with Ready Player One. One of my friends just left it behind. And I was like, well, let's read this. And I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And then like 4 hours later, I'm just like laying back, reading it, and I'm turning for more pages, and there's none left. And then I look at, I go play I found an old arcade bar in Los Angeles and spent like 6 hours there. Because that's what books can do. They can wake up that child in you.
I got really into audiobooks a few years ago, and one of the things I've found has helped me a lot, actually, is that when I find a narrator that I like, I follow them to genres that I would normally never read. And like, for example, late last year, I got on a kick of reading South African crime thrillers because one of my favorite narrators does a bunch of those. And it actually was like this amazing case study in world building to read fiction set, on our planet, but in a place I've never been and don't know anything about. And he's writing for locals who live there, and yet I totally felt like I knew the place within just a few of those books, and so I think about those all the time now when I'm thinking about how to describe settings on science fiction worlds.
Oh, can I just recommend a movie that I saw recently that really took me by surprise? It's called Swiss Army Man. It's got, some people have seen it. It's got Daniel Radcliffe as a farting, boner-wielding corpse that a shipwrecked man finds. Excuse me if there are any children in the audience. That a shipwrecked man finds and uses as a multi-purpose tool to survive, and the corpse eventually begins stalking them, and it's kind of this magic realist, weird story, like so exceptionally strange and so beautiful, and it really surprised me in many ways because it on the one hand, it's two white dudes and, very heteronormative at first, and then it just completely subverts that in such a strange way. I can't even explain it, but I think everyone should go watch it. It's very, very peculiar.
I want to sit on you pitching books now.
All right, well, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. Raise your hand. I'll call on you one at a time. Gentleman who stood up immediately, go ahead. That's you in the black shirt, sir.
Sure. First, I actually most familiar with Scott's work, and something that a lot of people know is that he has narrated a lot of his earlier books that were released under other publishers or other imprints. And expanding this out to each of you, if there was either a current book or maybe a future book that you haven't yet written, of the audiobook narrators that you know, maybe they haven't read for your books yet, but what narrators would you love to have read your works in the future?
I gotta say, well,
I was going to say, I'm behind the times. I mean, I had never listened to an audiobook until someone said you have to
Oh my
listen to
gosh.
your book because it's super cool. It has a multicast and it's great. And so I was like, oh, yeah, I could see myself liking that. So my favorite one so far is that one.
I love how eager you are to answer the question, like you had something to add. I would say, have you ever heard James Earl Jones read the Bible? That one.
I gotta say, I don't know the name of the person who read your book, Indra, but they did such an incredibly good job that it makes me want to write something set in India just so I can get them to do the audiobook for it. It was really, really good.
I actually haven't heard the audio.
Oh my gosh.
Yet. Yeah.
I'll play you a sample at dinner, okay?
I look forward to it. I also haven't really listened to any audiobooks, but I hear that the narrators who were chosen for my book are excellent.
They're very good.
You
Yes.
just confirmed that. So I guess I got lucky there. But for a future book, there is one person. Her name is Mavish Murad. She does a podcast for Tor.com called Midnight in Karachi, and and she kind of interviews authors. She's interviewed a whole bunch of them. She recently interviewed Margaret Atwood, and she has an amazing voice, and she's really good at narrating. So it would be wonderful to have a book be narrated by her.
I would like to get Kathy Bates to narrate one of my books. If you've ever heard an audiobook narrated by Kathy Bates, it's just on a completely different level. She is badass to the hilt, so maybe someday. So
I actually have no idea what the answer to this question would be. The guy who reads my audiobooks has this very kind of gruff and, well, not really gruff, but a very deep and Western voice. So he also narrates a lot of cowboy books and this kind of thing. And when I first heard it, I wasn't sure it was a good match, but the more I heard of it, he's actually very talented in the way that he can do the voices of the women and the children in the book, because there's several kids in the book, and he does those amazingly well. So I mean, that's actually one of the few audiobooks that I've heard is one of my own. I don't generally listen to them because I like to read really quickly, and so audio stuff tends to go a little too slowly.
To be honest, Alan, if the whole writing thing doesn't work out, you can narrate my books because your voice is awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, let's just have Alan
Tell
do
me
it.
more.
Thank you. I'm available for hire.
Oh, No. Well, okay, I'll say one more thing. I've listened actually to all of your books, all of you guys.
Wow.
And I have to say that the villain, I don't remember the name or even if the character was named, but in Sleeping Giants, the guy who voiced the villain in that audiobook was one of the best performances I've
The
ever heard.
interviewer?
Yes.
If I'm right, it's the same guy. What's his name? Andy Seagum, something like that. He voiced Watto in Star Wars Episode 1.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It's such an
Think
amazing
that's
performance. Yeah, you guys have to check it out.
Young lady in the blue.
I was wondering who did the art for the Devourers. Because that is a gorgeous cover.
Chris Panettiere?
Correct. Chris
Yeah.
Panettiere.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why I had the French accent.
Thank you.
French accents are okay.
No, they are, but I think inaccurate in this this particular case.
Gentleman in the front.
I was just curious, what's the collaboration process like when you're talking to experts for research or you're dealing with your editor?
Let's talk about the research part.
How long do we have?
Research can be a lot of fun. Pierce and I actually just went on a little road trip to Palmdale to visit the NASA, Neil Armstrong NASA Test Flight Center. We got a private tour, spent a day up there. It was awesome. And it wasn't like we were researching a particular topic. We were just there to check stuff out and see what interests us and learn things.
Going around touching things we weren't supposed to touch.
Yeah,
Can I
yeah.
take your picture of this? No.
No.
Can I take a picture of this?
No.
Can I take a picture of this? No.
But that was a good time. Yeah.
I think
Research is,
for me, the more books you do, the more skill you have to develop at asking the right questions. Because if you just start shotgunning all the things you want to know, you're going to spend an enormous amount of time processing information that's not going to go in the book. And when you get to a certain point in your career, all the time you spend on stuff that doesn't go in the book, that is technically money and time lost. And there's always going to be some trimming of the fat. There's nothing you can do about that. But getting better at like, okay, I just need to know this thing, and then tell me this, and the few things I need to know to understand the context of it. If you get better at that, then and they appreciate it too, because it takes up less of their time.
My problem is knowing ahead of time what I'm going to need to know before I get there. It's kind of a strange dance that I'm doing when I'm doing research. Oh yeah, I can fall down the rabbit hole of research for a long, long time. I mean, I read something like 150 books when I was researching these books. Mostly what I read when I was writing was research, and so just that part of it took quite a lot of time.
Yeah, I think there's a vast difference between my relationship with research, because I research in order to be inspired, to find ideas, because I'm making up most of the rules of my world. Whereas Alan, I feel like you have to get the buckles on the armor right, unless you'll get like emails from 3 guys who said you did it wrong, you know. And so I feel like there's a different responsibility depending on the book you're writing. I mean, Sylvain probably had a lot more theoretical robotics or researching robotics, and he has to actually integrate it into the writing. Mine's is really technology is so far-fetched in a lot of ways that it's more almost like sci-fi fantasy, and so I'm really looking at research through history. So I'll read The Fall and Decline of the Roman Empire to find out ideas for the next series, as opposed to reading or asking a scientist for a gravity cannon.
The easiest solution is to be Daniel H. Wilson, get a PhD in robotics, and then write about robots. That's
not a bad idea.
It's the easiest way.
That's the shortest route, believe it or not.
Yeah, I didn't know. I did linguistics, and now I have to read physics papers and stuff, and it's just different.
I was going to say I did a lot of research, but then Alan said he read 150 books. Like,
Some of that.
Christ. I read maybe 10.
It was over quite a long period of time, and some of them were really short.
Yeah, well, research is fun for me. And, even for my short stories, my science fiction short stories, I generally don't put most of it into the story, but it creates this kind of creative backing in your head, and it's just really fun to find out about different things, and they might go into your other stories in the future. And
But it creates that foundation a lot.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of it is just to get the background right.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't actually.
Yeah, most of it doesn't even go in directly.
Yeah.
You're convincing yourself it's the right idea a lot of times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, this is our last question. The young lady with the glasses right here.
So I was wondering, because when it comes to reading books, it's sort of second nature when someone dies, unless you're emotionally attached to that character. But you were killing people off in like 3rd grade. It was like
Wait. What do you mean, was anybody worried about that? That's very much a present tense conversation.
I still get calls from my mom, and she asks, "Why did you think you had to do that?"
Oh, my mom won't read my work anymore. Honey, baby, I'm so proud of you. You're great. No, I'm not gonna. That's not for me. I'm not gonna read that. And I grew up reading her Stephen King books, and now she won't read my books. So it tells me something's really screwed up in there.
My friend and I wrote a murder mystery set in India, actually, when we were in summer of 7th grade. And no one questioned that at all, but it was the Dungeons and Dragons we were playing that people were worried about, actually. That was a bigger problem. So
I don't think anyone was worried about well, my teacher was more concerned about the usage of gout than the cats. So yeah, I think my parents were delighted when they found out that I wanted to write and that I liked to write and didn't really care about the gore.
Yeah, my dad just said, you have to make it creative. That's it.
I got nothing.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank my esteemed panelists here, Sylvain Neuvel, Indra, Scott Sigler, Pierce Brown, Alan Smale, and Jason M. Hough. And thank you all for coming. Have a great rest of the con.